evening and a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on our Economic Forum, where we discuss all things relating to the economy. My name is Farai Gwaze. Once again, feel free to also engage with us on our social media platforms. That's Economic Forum Zimbabwe. You can also send us your questions, comments, and your contributions on our WhatsApp platforms. Today, looking closely at infrastructure development in Zimbabwe, appreciating the significance of it economically, but at the same time, what the future prospects are for Zimbabwe. Looking at Vision 2030, what will the country look like, especially from a construction and an infrastructure position. Joining me in studio is a seasoned infrastructure and construction development entrepreneur, Mr. MASIMBA Marangwanda. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Farai. How are you doing? Thanks for having me, man.
This was a very exciting discussion to have because currently there is a project that is taking place in Harare, the Nahanda Monument. Now, I only bring it up because of the significance that it's had currently with regards to aesthetic development, and we'll touch on that a bit later.
Or the controversy.
Yes, or the controversy around it, rather.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, I know that you're also part of that particular initiative. Whatever you can share with us on your insights, please.
It's a historical monument, as we know. And like I say to a lot of people, the CBD in particular has not seen anything like it in a long time. And it's brought both excitement and also a bit of controversy. And as an insider, we were pretty excited to be roped in for such a project. Right. It was very sensitive because of the location of it. A very busy road, a very busy intersection, and it brought in a lot of engineering complexities, which is something that, for our field is exciting when you're given a challenge and you have to look at different solutions. So we really enjoyed being on that project, and the best part of it was that it was just a team of young guys.
Yeah, and you brought up engineering complexities, right? When one would look at the current infrastructure that has been placed in the CBD, one would wonder, okay, you see what seems to be a flyover, and you're also seeing what seems to be a clearly demarcated space right in the middle of Samora Machel. Just give us an understanding of these complex engineering innovations that are being taken.
It's a walkway that we're putting up, and that walkway gets to the center where you will have the lady herself right in the middle. And the complexity is the fact that she will not be stationary, she'll be rotating, having a viewpoint of the whole city, right? Meaning that you in the center of that, where there's a centerpiece, there's a mechanism that has a lot of weight which needs to constantly be in motion, whilst you're also carrying weight of people who are moving around. And that bridge in itself will have pieces of history inscribed on it, right? So the complexity was, from Julius Nyerere, you also have a stream running underneath. Underground.
So we actually do have an underground stream.
Yes, that comes all the way from Newlands going down, right? And when you build where there's a stream, right, and when you're looking at the structure in itself, it has to sit on top of it. Meaning that there's a gaping hole right on the bottom. So you need to find ways of moving all the weight into the ground without affecting that stream that's been there from as way back as the 60s. Right.
And the local component in the engineering team that put that innovation together?
Yeah, so outside being local, the whole team is under 40.
Right.
And we commend Minister Moyo, July Moyo, for insisting to say, the whole team, we want the next generation to come and be part of this history.
Sure.
We don't want it to be driven by Susu Madara. And it's been local guys. And this is what you want on a project like this. You want people to feel proud to say this is what we were doing.
Now, one would look at such a endeavor, and you say local guys, and we've also touched into the born free element. But that would mean that to some degree you have to have specialized in a specific skill and trade over a period of time to be able to be acceptable, to have merit and comply. You wouldn't just be chosen for the sake of. Tell us a bit about how that managed to come together.
Of course, when the team was being assembled, look, 40 is young, but 40 also means that you've been around for a while.
Yeah.
So that's what they were looking at the expertise, looking at saying, okay, what projects have you done before? And because of the sensitivity of the project, you have to pick the right type of team from the get-go. The discussions were back and forth on who comes in. In time, they then selected that type, the team. They were very confident that these are the people who can deliver.
Right. Okay. Now, from an aesthetic position, this also is a national symbol, if I could loosely put it as that. Its significance also translating the new dispensation, but more importantly, also addressing, I think, what you've brought up, which is the young generation coming in and taking a position, right. In development. Now, that is an aesthetic one. Where are we going with functional? Like, what are we seeing taking place in that particular space?
Do you know the people who were the happiest to hear about this was the tourism industry?
Right.
Because they all said, you get someone coming to Crown Plaza for business, and then they're going to spend a day or two in town and they want to move around. Where do you take them? Where do you show them? Right? And this being a part of history, they can go and walk up there and get to see who she was and read about it. And it was amazing that they bought into it as quickly, and they were saying, the city needs more.
Right.
You go to New York, you're going to the Statue of Liberty, right? We've got a lot of other areas in the country where tourism is flourishing, from Victoria Falls to Nyanga, you name it. But in the city, we've never really pushed to say, who are the people who come into Harare? Right. What if you're coming in for a layover? And you're sleeping for a night or two?
I don't want to tie in too many issues, because there is the regulatory bodies, there's the local government and the council level in terms of what they need to contribute. But before we take a break, share with us some of your insights around the urban development that could take place in Harare as a result of this particular infrastructure project that is taking place.
Well, there's quite a lot. There have always been plans, even from the 70s, to open up that stream and actually put benches. And the conversation was had, informally, to say, outside of that, can we not look at resuscitating something like that, where you now can have people actually see that stream? If you see from the manholes, it's very beautiful, especially after the rainy season. You can hear the water, and you can see it going. So there's going to be, from the master plan, there are definitely plans behind trying to work with the monument. Some of them we can't share right now. Some of us are practical people. We like to talk about things that actually start happening. Right. So definitely, the master plans have been there for a while. And it's good to see that outside of this, the conversation from policymakers to say, so what else can we add to ensure that, because remember, like I said in the beginning, the city is not seeing something like this in a while, and you want to keep that momentum going.
Are we going towards Sunshine City status? Is this what the...
I wish I worked for council.
No, we'll take a short break and be right back with more Economic Forum. Stay tuned. Good evening once again, and a very warm welcome to you if you've just joined us here on our Economic Forum, where we discuss all things relating to the economy. It's the second segment of our discussion today, closely looking at infrastructure, construction and development in Zimbabwe. Helping me unpack this particular area is a young entrepreneur, rather, in infrastructure, construction and development, Mr. MASIMBA Marangwanda. Now, before we took a break, you made a joke about not being employed by council or being there. However, one can't help but also pick up from the same area that we touched on in the previous discussion. There's a lot of urban renewal required in Harare. And I know that it's tied to issues of local governance and it's tied to issues of council. So to some degree, you can't really address too much of that. But the opportunities are vast, surely.
I look at Harare and I think it's almost like a green field. The amount of infrastructure that needs to be resuscitated is a lot. It's going to cost a lot, but on the back end brings in the opportunities for growth, right? Especially for construction. Just trying to resuscitate the road network alone, you could have 3-4 contractors and they would probably struggle with capacity over 3 years just to do that, if not 4 or 5.
How so?
Because also remember, it's a very busy city, right? So trying to navigate, just us working in the Samora and Julius area, you can tell how you close that one corner, the amount of traffic you cause all over. Yeah. Now, try to imagine trying to have Heritage Table pretty much being resurfaced. Tonga being resurfaced, all the inner and secondary roads being resurfaced. So the potential is there. And I'm glad that government is now taking a position to say, you know what, we need to treat this as, state of an emergency. it's on the back end, like what they're doing on the Beitbridge Road, which we'll probably talk about later. If you give it to locals, it helps capacity and it helps jobs. Because in the long term, when you look at the retrogression from 20 years, this is exactly what we need. Right? This is the opportunity where we are saying, let's give it to our people and let them fix it. And it becomes a beautiful story.
Right. So I'm glad that you do bring up the potential that could come and how we could all tap into it and being the beautiful story that is Zimbabwe in the future. However, the work needs to get done now. And we finally found a situation where infrastructure development is critical in contributing towards economic development in Zimbabwe. We seem to keep looking at the US dollar, the auction markets, tobacco. We keep looking at all those things, but we fail to realize that, hold on, things need to get from somewhere to somewhere. You brought up the Beitbridge Road. A sticking point being Beitbridge Chirundu, which we won't get too much into right now, but just that particular section of that road not having been addressed, what one considers as the loss that that would be incurred, but at the same time the potential revenue that's now going to come as a result of that development. Surely we're going somewhere.
We are definitely going somewhere, and that's what you want. A lot of cargo that passes through that road is driven by Zimbabweans, right? All the way from Cape Town going to DRC. So that road is very important as a gateway into SADC, right? We need to move away from the notion that Zimbabwe needs to for Zimbabwe. I'm not saying that's wrong, but also remember that we have neighbors and we're a family, and we need each other in SADC to work, and that gateway is required, and it helps the rest of the bloc be able to help economically, just like how the EU. If you're in the EU, they work well, right? And we need that. We need that.
But we seem to have a strategic, I don't know, help me understand. We have a strategic advantage by being centered in the middle of SADC. And I think a term that a previous guest once here used, which is land-linked country. Land-linked. Yes. Now, why aren't we, I don't know, we don't seem to be leveraging off that.
I think we are now coming alive to the fact that we need to leverage. We understand the importance of one border from Zim into a lot of countries, right? Which should work well to us. For our own business, the amount of inquiries that have come in from our neighbors to do business with us has been interesting. I'm even off to the DRC in 2 weeks, right? And this is the advantage you're talking about. Zimtrade has been pushing the conversation to say, let's get our products into the rest of Africa. Let's be competitive. Let's look at the market not only of potentially 12 million people, but potentially a block of people. So I think the conversation is now there. Now the organizations that the government have now set up, it's different from previously. This is now setting up teams of people who are private sector minded, who come in, who understand the language, who know how to talk to people.
As a young player in the game who also sees the advantage of knowing how to talk to people, how receptive are our peers? Let me put it like that. How receptive are our peers out in the rest of the world to being able to be part of what is the future projection of the continent? But let's simplify it to Zimbabwe.
Okay. There's a lot of interest and it's a good question. Because, like it or not, our peers have memories of home, right? And they want to invest being at home. They want to visit 2-3 times and say, I think I want to go in and live in Zim. So from the space that we are infrastructure-wise, there's actually conversations in the back end on trying to create a vehicle that speaks to that, to say, invest in this, and this is what we essentially are going to get. I think it was yesterday when they published the numbers from the contribution of the diaspora to the economy in 2020. It hit over $1 billion. Right? But this is not $1 billion that's being funneled into something strategic. It's just money coming in for you, me, and the next person. But if you put a vehicle where you say, we want to change Avondale and build new condos and flats for people our generation, single, new families who are trying to find a central place to stay in, are we saying we will not have that type of?
I was going to ask earlier on when you brought up some buildings being old, etc., and I don't want to get too specific on it, but what's your position on, do some structures just need to go and do others need to be refurbished and developed on? How do we equate? Because one position that was also held was that one person was said to me, if you buy a property after 2008, be very careful, because the chances are that the time in which that house was built was during the economic challenges and they went through speedy processes to finish off. But a house that was built before 2008, you're most likely to find that it's got a very sturdy foundation. So which ones do we tear down and which ones do we revamp?
Can I take you a step back?
Sure.
Where are the banks?
Okay.
If the banks come onto the table, the owners of commercial buildings can take their title deeds and say, I want to change the outlook of my building. I want to go from 4 stories to 8 stories, right? Same goes. Neighborhoods can be changed if there is mortgage funding, right? And it speaks to what you're saying. There are buildings and structures that will always need to be revamped. That's guaranteed. You can build a structure today with the most modern design. 30, 40 years from now, it's just going to look like you need to change it. And unfortunately, we need the right type of structured funding that allows for that to happen. Right?
Okay.
Because you can't tie up money on your own.
The right type of structured funding. On that note, we'll take a short break and be right back with more Economic Forum. Stay tuned. Welcome to Economic Forum and a good evening to you if you've just joined us here. It is a final segment, however, focusing on all things in relation to the economy today, looking closely rather at infrastructure, construction and development, and an entrepreneur in that specific area. Joining me in studio is Mr. MASIMBA Marangwanda. Now, before we move on from some of the areas that we have touched on, especially when it comes to the benefits that come from developing, the misconception, the conception rather, that when they generate a certain amount of revenue, they want to put it into a fixed asset, is we all seem to typically look at buying a stand. Yeah. And we then look at that stand as being some way of retaining value, and it ends there. Very few times do you find the impetus being, I'm going to buy a stand to be able to develop on so that I can then, as a result, do X, Y, and Z. Why do we find ourselves thinking that way and approaching development in that particular way? And what would your opinion be of how best we could approach it?
It's an emotional decision.
Sure.
The intention is always to buy a stand, then start to dream, right? And say, I want to build on it. This is where I want to stay. Very rarely do you find people buy a piece of land, take the paperwork and just throw it on the side. Right. But what happens is that because they have to raise funding on their own, it always takes longer. How many houses do you drive around and you see that at some point he ran out of money?
Yeah.
How many double stories have you seen where you can tell at some point money was good, and this speaks back to what I'm saying. Yeah. With mortgage funding, you don't have to tie up all that money. But because we are emotionally connected to wanting to buy land, do you understand? We then rush to say, I've got a bit of money, I'll buy the stand and I'll figure out how I'm going to build. Okay? You remember you talked about the shortcuts?
Yes.
I've had clients where you ask them, oh, you're building a house like this with this type of sand, do you have an engineer? And they don't. Because they don't want to then take the outlay of paying the engineer. They're just saying, we'll figure it out. Right. And eventually, you always have disasters coming along. So until we sort out that structural funding, the whole mortgage funding aspect, we are going to get a lot of people who make emotional decisions to want to buy land, sit on it. 10 years down the line, that land has served you no purpose. And you find yourself having to sell it, right? And not even at the true value of that land.
So let's look at some income generators. We've seen quite a few cluster home setups happening. If you go to the Newlands area here in Harare, you find that a lot of homes that were there have been converted into cluster homes. Clearly large, vast spaces of land where you find 8 to even 10 units being put up on a previous homestead.
Yeah. So this is Farai with this piece of land, then realizes, okay, I don't have the capacity to develop it, goes to a developer and says, let's develop this, and we either sell them and then you recover your money for the project, and you also make something off it as well, right? And maybe just walk out with one unit now.
Right.
That's actually complete.
Right.
And this is what's happening because the demand is there. Don't get it fooled. The demand for accommodation is there. There's a friend of mine who works for one of the biggest developers, and he says that they actually do not have enough product for their clients.
Right.
Okay? And this speaks to that, to say there's that demand for finished product, not necessarily just for land. So if banks come up and they come to the table and they structure the funding correctly, we are going to get more of these things because people want to live. And not everyone wants to buy. Young people who just started their new job, he doesn't mind paying $300 a month staying in the middle of Newlands.
What about if you look at a young family, middle-aged, right? They've now reached a significant cap where they're like, hold on, they're sitting maybe on a liquid base of about $200,000 to $300,000. They're now considering, listen, we want to be able to own a property. Now, in wanting to do so, would your advice be around acquiring an already established property or getting a run-down, dilapidated property and building from there? I ask that question because it seems to be a lack of understanding what you can do if you take the time to build from the ground up yourself. Not necessarily so that you have to acquire a homestead already, but your thoughts.
Build what your vision is and love it. Buying someone else's vision is very tricky, right? You always find yourself having to live with certain things that you're not liking in that space. But building allows you to take the time to actually go through. But because we're emotional creatures and we have very little patience, we want to shop around and say, I want to negotiate on buying this house. And there's nothing really wrong with it. But I think that we need more modern looking houses. It helps with the value appreciation of the land in general, right? When you get newer houses coming up, when you buy an old dilapidated house and you redo it, right, it helps the value proposition of the area you're in. So yeah, I'm a fan of the idea of building.
Right. Now, why I poignantly ask that question is because a lot of the times that people decide to want to get involved in building, they don't seem to see the significance of maintenance of some of these structures that do go up. From some of the work that you have done, what do you think is important to be able to acknowledge when it comes to maintaining structures that have been developed?
Right. Maintenance is critical and it's very important. But the conversations are always with your architect.
Right.
They will always tell you that the cost of this house that you're building, there's always a formula to show the cost of maintaining the house. So it gives you an appreciation to say, how much are you going to spend every month maintaining this home? Because I actually say, and look, I'm going to be crucified for this, but the house you live in is not an asset.
Yeah.
Right? It's a liability because you take money out of it. And in that house, there's no way Farai is going to convince his wife. He's taking the title deeds of the house they're living in to the bank for funding for something, regardless of how safe it might be. Right. The safest thing is to just say, we live in this house. So it's not necessarily an asset, it's a liability. So understand the cost of that liability.
Now, we are coming to the end of our discussion. I wish we had more time, but Vision 2030. Right, Zimbabwe sees itself becoming a middle upper income economy, right? Looking at least having a significant GDP of each household that meets the global standard, right? What, from an infrastructure perspective, do you see the future of Zimbabwe becoming?
A very exciting future, actually. The projects that we are actually even having conversations around right now, just for Harare, are going to be exciting. We've got projects that we're doing in Victoria Falls, where you walk into the falls, you look at what's happening and you realize that, hold on a second, 10 years from now, the falls is not going to be the same, right? And the plans have always been there. And this is the thing, if they could show you the master plans of what Zimbabwe is supposed to be, it's exciting. It's 100% exciting.
Right.
So 2030, as far as I'm concerned, is actually very far away.
Right.
But I'm happy that the conversation is on middle income.
Right.
This is what drives any growth economy, right? So definitely, we're excited about it.
That's it. Masimba, thank you so much for joining us here today. We definitely do look forward to speaking to you again in the future and looking forward to more of your insights.
Thanks a lot, man. Cheers.
That's all the time that we do have here today, rather, on our Economic Forum. My name is Farai Gwaze. Pleasant viewing and good night.